WPSL, Port St. Lucie.
6 now after 11, WPSL brings you Ask a Rabbi with Rabbi Shafir Lobb. Welcome back.
Thank you. I am thrilled to be back on WPSL Digital 1590. And it's great to be back. Last week, we had finished the show by saying we were going to talk a little bit about identities and about how we combine them and how they're hybrid. And so let's talk just a little bit about identity. Identity is how you define yourself, how you satisfy those personal needs inside. All human beings have very basic human needs, whether you use Maslow's hierarchy or any of the other systems. There's probably 30 or 40 different systems that I'm aware of. And the one that I like to use is one that says that obviously we need to feel safe. We need to feel certain that we know what's going to happen. And that's the first primary thing, because if you feel the house is going to fall down on you, if the tidal wave's going to hit him any minute, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't feel safe. That's reasonable. So that's the first need that humans have. The second need that we have is to be significant for somebody. We need to have some importance, some connection with people. And the third thing that we need, interestingly, is that after we're certain and we're sure that things are going to be, we get bored. So we want some variety, right? We don't always want cheese pizza. Maybe we want it with something on it, right? When you complain about the bologna sandwich that you make each day, there's that joke, right? The guy opens it up and says, "Oh, it's bologna again, bologna again." Well, why doesn't your wife make something different?
But it's funny, but you still check even though you know it's going to be bologna.
Yeah, you want it to be something different. The other one that I like is when you rent that movie that you've seen 15 times, hoping that it's going to be somehow different or you're going to see something different in it. And so we need variety. It's why we every once in a while go for the box of different cereal or drive home a different way or whatever. Some have a greater need, some have a lesser need. And then the fourth basic need that we have is to feel a sense of love or connection. Most people settle for connection and companionship because love is risky, and it's much harder to achieve. So if we look at those four basic needs, and the spiritual needs are above and beyond that, just real briefly, in the system that I like to use, the first spiritual need. Right, those first four are the personality, who you are. Above that is to learn and grow. And then the sixth need is to share and give something back to society. So that's the highest need. And which needs are most important for them, how they express them, those are all a function of your personality, the community in which you live, the community with which you identify. And so part of what we do in having a Jewish or a Christian or a Muslim identity is we're defining that community in which we satisfy some of those needs. And to give you an idea of how those needs can play out, the fastest way to satisfy those first three needs of being certain, of being significant, and having variety is unfortunately pointing a gun at somebody, because you're in control when you have the weapon, or at least you think you are for the second, and so you're pretty certain that you can defend yourself. You are certainly pretty significant to the person or persons at the other end of that weapon, and then there is that excitement of not knowing what's going to happen. I mean, that's an adrenaline thing, and so that satisfies the first three needs very well, unfortunately. And it's not going to change until we as a culture don't choose to use those ways to satisfy those needs. But we all find different ways to satisfy those needs. And our religion, our national identity, all of those play into those needs. Which ones are most important for people, again, varies with each individual. There's no way that I can presume that anybody's going to have the same needs that I have or want to satisfy them in the same way. And I ended last show by saying that I'm American Jewish or I'm Jewish American, and which one holds priority in a given moment is as much a function of what's happening, what's going on, and which of those needs I'm feeling needs to be more addressed in the moment. So, being Jewish certainly gives me that sense of connection. It gives me a roadmap on how to live, so that adds to the certainty. It, for me, certainly is significant. I'm a rabbi, so it really does add to how I interact with others. But even without that, just that, for me, sense of our community and knowing that we honor each person, and therefore each person in the community should, and I believe in our community certainly does, have significance and importance. It's one of the things that we pride ourselves in our congregation, that each person has a voice and a right to say, even if we don't agree with them. Kind of, the old, I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Mm-hmm. And we try to embody that as a community.
Can I interject?
Sure.
I agree with that completely, and I sort of preach that occasionally when I speak as president of the congregation for what they hope is only a couple minutes, but sometimes takes a little bit longer. I have never attended a synagogue on a regular basis. From the time I was a kid, even though I loved going to Hebrew school, I was never that kind of a Jew. Okay? Started going more often because my son was preparing for a bar mitzvah. And then what typically happens is you stop because you don't have to anymore. So the question becomes, seriously, why do I continue? And there's an easy answer. I don't always like going for the entire service and going from page 1 to page 78 and then going to page 1, whatever it is. And sometimes it gets a little bit monotonous. Sometimes I just wish we'd get to the end, or actually to the rabbi's sermon, because I like those. So I don't always go because I want to be there for that period of time. I go because of the community, because there are people there that I want to see, not just as friends, but I want to see because I care about what's going on in their lives, and I know they care about what's going on in my life. And so it becomes a place that feeds my soul, and I guess that satisfies one of those needs the rabbi is talking about. Now, I'm not saying other synagogues don't do that, but I've never gone to one. And I've gone to plenty where if I go in there on a Friday night, nobody will say a word to me. I'll sit there, I'll get the service, and that's that. Here, even if I'm not overly thrilled with the entire service, I know that there are people there that really care and are happy to see me, and that makes a difference.
And so, as we said, that satisfies, people do what satisfies their needs. And so being Jewish can satisfy a number of those needs. Being American can certainly satisfy a number of those needs. And I think I briefly mentioned last week that I feel strongly enough about my American identity and commitment that I served in the military. And so, I've got that piece. I was raised with the idea that you always give back, that America offers us freedoms. And the beauty of America is the separation of church and state. And it's one of the fun things that I teach about in my world religion class. The favorite question is, are we a Christian nation? And the answer is no, we're not. We are a nation where right now the majority of people are Christian. Was 70-some% the last census. My guess is it'll be lower this coming census for a number of reasons, and we can go into those later on. But we never were a Christian nation. We had Christian states, we had Christian colonies coming into the Union, but in order to be a Christian country, you have to pick one flavor. And Christianity is a huge family of religions. Right? It's all the religions that deal with the life, death, and teachings of Jesus. And which excludes a lot of people in the world. It's not the majority religion in the world. It's the largest, but only when we really use that very broad definition. And we start getting very narrow if we want to limit it to, say, Protestants and Catholics, and not going to be anywhere near as big. And so the Christian net is cast very big enough to exclude Islam, which does have Jesus as its Messiah, but not so narrow as to exclude Jehovah Witness and Christian Science and some of the Christianities that are a little more toward the outside of where Catholicism and most Protestant divisions are.
But again, those branches of Christianity came because it made me feel more comfortable.
Right.
Because I can't live up to everything that Catholic might want or require, but yet we just change it to fit our needs.
We all do.
And that's maybe how it all branched out.
Yeah. It's so the model that I use, again, in the class, and I've used it in the synagogue as well, in my temple, to talk about God is I draw a 6 or a 9 on usually a plate, but in the class it's on the blackboard. And if you position somebody at the top of the number, then it's one number, and if you position them at the other end, then it's the other number, right? So one person sees a 6 and one person sees a 9. They're both convinced that they're right. They don't see what the other person sees unless they're willing to
Change their perspective.
Right, change perspective and recognize that you can be somewhere else. And Stuart likes to say that it's a balloon with a tail. See, I did pay attention and I listened too. And we all see something different. Right? And the bottom end of that is that God is not Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Zoroastrian, not any of those. God is God. Right? And as I like to point out to people, if we live in one universe and we say that one creator, God, created that universe, then all religions have different, can't have different gods. Can't have different gods. If it's one creator creating one universe, it's not a different God. We are different. How we look at that 6-9, that entity, that we are taught in every religion I know that God, every religion that teaches about God says God is unknowable. God is the great mystery. God is the source of life. God is God. And so God is not put in a little box somewhere, not easy to define, and approached in different ways. And how we codify that approach, how we practice it. You know, do we do it on Saturdays? Do we do it on Fridays? Do we do it on Sundays? All of those help determine who and what our community is. And you're right, communities form around sets of beliefs. I like to define Judaism as a community in search of a faith, because we don't have a creed. Yes, there's the Maimonidean 13 Articles of Faith, and if you don't believe them, it doesn't make you less of a Jew. Yeah, it's one of the things that surprises people in class. We talked a little bit about it last week. You don't have to believe in God to be Jewish, right? Because Jewish identity is much broader than just a narrow set of beliefs. The only thing Judaism says is if you believe in God, if you believe in a creator, it's got to be one. Can't be 3 or 4. And there certainly is not a separate force that is equal to and separate from God that would be evil, which is one of the reasons why Judaism doesn't have Satan in the kind of way that some non-Jewish religions have. And so we don't, yes, there's a character in the book called Satan, Satan. L'Satan is to question something, to research it, to perhaps doubt it. It's a different kind of concept. It's not somebody who makes you do something wrong, but maybe steals your confidence. Might do that to you. Might strengthen it, depending on the person and the situation. So L'Satan, to figure things out, to get to the root of it, is not necessarily a bad thing. And the study of the devil in religion is actually a very interesting topic. Very misunderstood by most people, and very different from what some people think. It largely comes from the Zoroastrians. who posed the idea that the forces of light were battling the forces of evil, and they were going to have this clash. And, they kind of gave us that eschatological, that end of days idea that there'd be this tremendous battle between the forces, and those who chose to ally themselves with God, with goodness, would walk the narrow path into heaven. And the other souls, probably burn. And so that's part of where that idea comes from. It's not a Jewish concept. Yes, Scriptures has Gehinnom. It's a trash dump outside of Jerusalem. I've been there. They burn trash there. And certainly, so do you want to go there when you die? No, you don't want your body thrown in the trash heap, disregarded. You'd like to know that somebody cared about you while you were alive and takes care to properly return the body to the elements, which is the Jewish instruction. The Jewish instruction is give the molecules back into the system, that life can continue, that this planet has the pieces that it needs. Because each of us, along with having some unique features to who and what we are when we're alive, we also have trace elements. To me, this is the
carbon-based life form?
Carbon-based life form, but also with trace elements. Science actually says that we have in our bodies elements in very, very minute trace amounts that could not have been created in our solar system. Our sun is not old enough to have created these elements, and yet they're in us, and there isn't another sun close enough to have gotten those elements to us. How'd they get here? And I can understand if they're in the system and, we're developed inside our mother's womb and we're born, we come out of whatever she ate, whatever happened. And so those molecules are all around.
But all our mothers ate different things.
All our mothers.
And yet we have those same trace elements.
Right. We have those trace elements in whatever distributions each person has them. And so that becomes part of who we are chemically. And maybe it becomes part of who we are in personality and in needs as well. We really haven't figured out exactly how all of that interacts. We know that it does. We know that we affect a baby, certainly, if the mother uses drugs or alcohol or even smokes. Right? All of those can have profound effects on the fetus that's developing. And that makes sense because she's basically supplying the initial food blocks from which that fetus is going to grow into a human being. So, there's a chemical basis to who and what we are. And it kind of gets a little bit back to what the question was last time, which was, and now it escaped me. Okay, it went that quickly. Had to do with identity and how we define ourselves. And, Judaism says we're all unique individuals. We all contribute something precious to the universe. It's not egotistical. We all provide something that nobody else can. And so if one person is killed, and we hear this with Islam, and we hear this in many traditions, right? If one person is killed, it's as if you have taken out an entire world because we have depleted something. Jewishly, supposed to go back into the elements as quickly as we can. And, whether it goes into an apple tree or the bird eats it. And, right? It's an interesting thing to think about the planet and realize, among other things, that every bit of water, my phone is propped up on a bottle of water, which you can't see because it's behind the camera, but you'll see it on the YouTube archive. Yeah. There we go. And all of the water that we have on the planet has always been here.
Yes, I truly believe that as well.
Well, you have to, because, where's it going to come or go?
Yeah.
Right?
It goes back. It always goes back.
It always goes back into the system. In fact, I moved here from Tucson, Arizona, and a little bit north of Tucson, about a third of the way toward Phoenix, is something called Biosphere 2. And some people have heard of it. My students have the option to do actually a paper on it, because it's an interesting premise. What they did is they absolutely sealed Biosphere 2 off from Biosphere 1, in which we live, and 8 people lived in there for 2 years and 20 minutes. I know that because there's a book by the title of 2 years and 20 minutes, written by one of the people who was in that group. They did have a second group. They actually had to abort the second group. We've learned a lot about the things people do when you've got a small group of people and they have to interact. Unless you build in certain safeguards, they eventually get on each other's nerves really bad. If there's no escape.
Yes.
But
it's like cabin fever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the point of Biosphere 2, though, was that here you had a few acres undercover, sealed. They've got a desert, they've got a savanna, they've got a rainforest, they've got an ocean. They used to have a coral sea. I don't think that's alive anymore. I think it died. And, they had all kinds of species, and it went through. But it became really obvious to them that, if they used insecticide to raise the crops that they lived on, that would recycle very quickly and come back to them in their drinking water. So it wasn't the kind of delay that we have, perhaps, in using our insecticides. But they're going to come back. They're not going to, they don't leave either. They stay in the system. And sometimes when we create our chemicals, like our plastic bottles, we lock them in that form for a length of time until it breaks down, unless we do something to break down rubber. I used to work in the tire industry, and the rubber molecule lasts a really long time. In fact, if you one of the tricks that people used to do was when we studied tires, you would slice a piece of tire because there's anywhere from 30 to 100 components inside a tire. Most people don't realize that. They're very intricate designs. And when you're designing a new tire, you're working with the exact placement of the belt and the squeegee and the this and the that and the piece of rubber and what have you, and you want to see how they all line up when the tire is finally cured. And so very often when a tire engineer would retire, it was the habit to bury those in their yard because they work their way to the surface over time. And it's just because of the relative weights of soil and its settling qualities and the rubber which comes forward.
That's very interesting because if you had something metal, it would work its way down.
Right.
But rubber rises.
Rubber rises, yeah, which is part of the reason why the disposal of tires is such a challenge. The molecules don't break down. It stinks.
Yeah.
When it burns, and it burns a long time, and it's made from the latex of plants, and even more so, the synthetic latexes, the molecules, the chains hold really, really well. And so we've learned to modify our world. It's one of the interesting things that humans have done. We don't just make tools, we change the chemical properties of things because we've managed to achieve that level of knowledge. So it's not quite the same as the raccoon who figures out how to unstrap your garbage can. Yeah, one of my favorite
Little thief.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories from my husband is the story of his father walking outside one time and seeing the raccoon holding the lid to the trash can like a shield. Mine. Come and get me. So animals certainly do make tools. They use things. We had a family of mice a long time ago, and I watched them build an entire amazing community inside their little terrarium living space. And I was like, wow, you guys really do use tools. And you can see that. And I even see dogs, they'll use one thing to do something else or trick each other into doing things. They're much smarter than we think. Using tools is not different, but chemically changing our world, I think, is a human trait. And it's one that we need to take with some seriousness. So, back to identity. We've drifted and back to identity. And by the way, if anybody'd like to call in with a question, you're certainly welcome to, and the number is
340-1590.
There we go. Not a hard one to remember. 340-1590. So please do call if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll continue talking a little bit about identity and what it means to be a Jewish identity. So what are the pieces of a Jewish identity? Well, some of them are not doing things that non-Jews don't do, and some of them are specific things. I'd mentioned the kippah last week, something that I do. Not all Jews do. Well, that's one of the problems with Jews. It's true with everybody. Some do, some don't. You can't paint any religion, or any people for that matter, with a brush that paints everybody the same, because we're not. Stuart likes different things than I like. You like different things than I like. And it's not just a function of religion. It's a function of who and what we are, what our taste buds say, what our eyesight says, what textures we like near us, what makes us feel good, what makes us feel not so good, and what sensitivities we have. My nephew, who can't tolerate gluten, does not have anywhere near the love of bread that I have. Or pasta, maybe it would be better if I didn't love those things quite so much. But so we all have different things that are dictated to us, both by how and what our bodies are, what experiences we've had, and how we connect with others, and what's happened to us during our life. So many different things. What music we've been raised on, what we're used to. Stuart and I like to have a discussion about primacy very often, because what you experience first very often influences what you're going to experience later. So if your first experience with something is pleasant and enjoyable, you're much more likely to want to continue to do that. Now, the ancient teachers in Judaism used to put little bits of honey on the tops of the pages that the students would study. And as they studied, they could eat the honey to have this sweet association with studying Torah and with studying Hebrew. We don't quite do that. Sometimes we use candy, but
We also have the theory of recency.
Yes.
What comes nearer to the end is what you most remember. Happens in a courtroom too when you're doing your closing argument. And if we were to go simply by the theory of primacy, then my experiences in going to services, as much as I loved Hebrew school and I feel Jewish and I always felt Jewish, I would not go to services. That's my, the theory of primacy. For all those years, it was just not enjoyable. But it's been changed.
Would it have been better if they gave you candy?
Well, you know something, it's funny, you joke, but in Hebrew school, I went to an Orthodox synagogue growing up. It was the only one around. And one of the teachers used to go to a town further south in Jersey where she could get kosher gum. And we used to play a game of baseball when we had to learn our reading. And so you would announce whether you wanted to do a single, a double, triple, or a home run. Single was one line, double, etc. The other team would have to catch a mistake in a vowel and how you pronounced it. If they caught you, you were out. But if you got your single, you had one little chiclet of gum.
Okay.
Got your home run, you had 4 little chiclets of gum. And so that gum was an inducement, not just to do the work, but to go for more than you might otherwise have said, let's do it. So
but it also made the learning fun.
It did. And that's why there's so many techniques, and this is off topic, but so many techniques that rabbis or teachers or anybody could use. And when some teachers don't use them and the students decide to go to sleep, it's a shame. Because then you have those extraordinary teachers who capture your attention. And those are the ones you really learn from. But sort of taking it back to services, I never considered myself less of a Jew when I did not go to services. I'd come home and I'd have my Moses statue, and I'd have the Shabbos candles in the nook, and I'd have all these little things that reminded me, menorah and all these other little things I'd find at arts festivals, paintings. To me, that was my expression, my outward expression in my home of my identity. And it was my expression of what was inside my heart and how I felt. I didn't have to go to services to show that. But I will concede that going to services has a value different than what I got out of what I did. And that value to me, there's an educational value. You learn a little bit more. But honestly, that to me, that's not the value. The value is in being a Jew and understanding it solo, and in being part of a community. And the community expression of your Jewishness. Emotionally, that gives you a connection. It does something. Rabbi, who has studied all these and has PhDs on her way, may know better than I do, but it does something within inside of you that gives you that extra component. Now, if I met somebody on the street and they said, oh, I never go to synagogue, but I am very Jewish, I would not argue with them. They have every right to express their Judaism in that manner, and they are no less a Jew than I. They are no less a Jew than a rabbi, and I am not less of a Jew than the rabbi, even though the rabbi knows 100 times more than I do. That's one of the things she has an advantage on, but nobody knows what's in your heart. But there is an advantage to another component, and when you're open to these other components, they change overall how you perceive yourself and how you express how you perceive yourself. So you got primacy and recency.
You do. And you're right about remembering things, but that primacy is why it took a while to get you into services. Right? So, and I think that is part of what modern synagogues and churches and even mosques need to deal with, which is we are different people than our parents were. And the perception, when you leave services as a child, and you're now 50 or older, we'll leave it at that. It's been a while since you've been in community and seen what that service is and is like. And I think that's, again, one of the strengths of our congregation is that we're multi-generational. And so we've got a good number of youth that come and their parents. We've got a fair number of young people that come. And then we've got all the way up into the higher numbers. And if your congregation is, one of those, if it's an older congregation, then you're probably going to see an older service, because that's what they're used to. And if you've got the multi-generational, then you're changing and shifting and adjusting. I think that's one of the stimulus to change it, because the kids have a very different world.
And that's really interesting, because as much as I went to, Hebrew school, and I graduated from Hebrew school way back, in the teens.
When the
Back in the
dinosaurs were
day.
out.
When teenager, okay? And then I would go to services, high holy days. But it's amazing now that you go to services regularly, and I've noticed this, that certain things come back to you after all that time. How do I remember the words of this prayer or this song? Because I did it 1,000 times, and it's as if I still know it. And I can't sing with a lick, but I like to. Maybe people don't like hearing me. But when I hear the tune, even if I can't understand the Hebrew, frankly, and that's a problem with a lot of Jews, it gets me somewhere, particularly the fact that I don't have to look at the prayer book to do all the words. I know it. And then the rabbi will throw a wrench in that little game by coming up with a new tune to the same prayer or song. And I cannot follow worth a lick.
Oh, so it's the melody that's stuck.
Right, and I have to look at the prayer book and try to remember to pronounce the Hebrew words, which I still have some difficulty with. Some of them are easy, some of them are hard. So you change the melody, now all of a sudden it's a part of what you remember, it's different. I will concede again. There are some of the newer melodies that I've now gotten used to, and I enjoy very much. every so often the rabbi will say with regard to a particular, which melody do you want to do it in? And, there'll be a consensus, and, we'll switch every so often. And if I go back to my old, when I was 8 and 9 and 10 years old, and we get that older melody, okay, I may not enjoy doing it every Friday night anymore. I like the newer one. But when you get back to that older one, it does take you back.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a value not only to the tradition of the way you did it, but there's a value to changing that tradition and doing it in a different way.
And so you're exactly right that what you've really learned is the melody. And it came as a real shock to me. I was raised quite uniquely. With my father, I spoke Hebrew. With my mother, I spoke German. And, of course, I spoke English publicly. My mother was from Vienna, so, of course, we spoke, Wienerisch, Viennese German. And my father had made the decision to work with me and learn actually modern Israeli Hebrew, not so much biblical Hebrew as modern spoken Hebrew. Well, you kind of have to if you're going to talk about everyday things, because they didn't quite have all of them back in the day. And when I was very early on a teacher and getting an in-service, and one of the people stood up there and said, most people in a congregation do not know the prayers, certainly not the Hebrew ones. Yeah. And after she said that, I went and I stood next to somebody, and they started out the first couple of words, and then it was la 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 non. They were just making nonsense syllables, but they knew the melody. And Stuart's exactly right. When you change that touchstone melody, and they don't know the words, they're lost. And so,
Or it's new to them.
It's sometimes it's new and exciting, but most people really don't like change. They like variety, but on their terms. And so, the key is to bring in, we don't change every song every service. Now, we might do a special service where everything's different, and it's just to really, I call those traveling at home. Going as if you were going to visit a new synagogue, and you heard their melodies. And yes, 50, 60 years ago when you traveled, you largely heard the same, interestingly enough, European melodies because of the large influx of immigrants that came through at the end of World War II. They brought their melodies with them, and it was a way of holding on to home. Mm-hmm. And so they held those with an iron grip, and the kids learned them. They don't have any clue what they're singing, and they're still singing them. And I know that that's true in a different kind of way. Not only did I hear it from the people after I was made aware of it, but I remember in school singing, those wonderful little songs like Strangers in the Night, Exchanging Glances. I had no idea what that song was about until one day I actually sat and said, no wonder my parents looked at me funny when I sang that song. I'm sure they were thinking, what the heck is their daughter doing? And I clearly was not going out exchanging glances with strangers in nightclubs. But, it was the melody and the rhythm of the song that had captured my little teenage brain. And now I recognize that, it was a little teenage brain. It's always amazing as you get older and realize how young that little brain is when you're young, and you don't think so. And, what can I say? And people do that. They learn songs, and they have no idea what it is that they're saying. When we test kids and ask them what the Pledge of Allegiance says, right, they have no idea what they're saying. And very often they've made up words.
Okay, I have a problem with that. I don't understand that. If they're doing the Pledge of Allegiance in English, and English is their language, how can they not know what they're saying?
It's a cadence thing. It's you know how it goes. It's like when kids do the alphabet and they say LMNOP, and not LMNO.
Except for my Chinese students.
It's a cadence. Yeah.
Well, I guess that's a failure then in instruction.
They never really listen to what the words mean.
I can understand why I could sing Adon Olam and not know what the heck I'm singing, and it's a shame. It's a crying shame. But I enjoy it. I enjoy the melody. I know it's important. I may understand a one-sentence, synopsis of what it's about. But it's a shame I don't really know what I'm saying. It's the same way I can listen to certain music that's not English and enjoy it because I enjoy the beat and the rhythm. But when it comes to the Hebrew, the way they taught Hebrew in the United States was you learn the Hebrew that you needed for the prayers and you learn the Hebrew you need for the songs, but you had no idea what you were saying. And in a way that's a shame because as I have gotten just little glimpses of some of what the songs or the prayers actually say, it provides such deeper meaning, which is, I guess, why some people, whether you're Jewish or you're Christian, that really study it, they get something extra out of it, just like you do if you do anything else. Yeah. But to me, the only thing I can get is that good feeling, unless in the sermon the rabbi says, and let me tell you about Adon Olam. Then I learn.
Which every once in a while I do. I throw in little bits and pieces because it fits into the topic. And so, Stuart, yes, kids recite the Pledge of Allegiance without knowing those words because they weren't taught them to read them first and to understand what they're saying. They just mouth syllables and, if you ask a kid what the Pledge of Allegiance says, you might be really surprised to find out what they think it says. Yeah. It's mind-boggling. And we have really done a disservice in a lot of ways in not teaching our children to read better than so we're giving something here. Four witches, yeah. Four witches stand. Yeah, right.
Oh, four witches.
Four witches stand. A lot of kids think that. And, and it makes no sense, and that's a whole long story. I think we really do cheat our kids by teaching them songs without having them actually read what they're singing. I mean, that's how I was reciting Strangers in the Night. I had no idea what those syllables really said, although I certainly could have listened to it even as a teenager, and, and I'd like to think that I'd have understood it, even though I didn't go to nightclubs and exchange glances with strangers.
Well, that may be why you didn't get it, because wasn't an experience. It was just a song.
It was just la 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 la.
Yeah.
Lovers at first sight.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Never knowing, right? And part of that was the musical quality of Sinatra's voice singing it, right? So I like that, and we've had certainly nonsense songs, right? Mares eat oats and does eat oats and little lambs eat ivy. A kid'll eat ivy too, wouldn't you?
I mean, I knew that song and didn't know we were talking about mares and oats.
Yeah.
I thought it was just a rhyme.
Mares and oats.
I didn't. It took me a long time. I was an adult before I figured out, wait a minute,
Yeah.
mares eat oats and does.
Yeah.
I just learned that this second.
Oh, really? You
I
didn't
thought
know
that was a
one?
nonsense thing.
Okay.
See?
Yes.
Exactly.
A kid.
And what's little lambsy divies?
No,
Little
little
lambs
lambs eat ivy.
Oh, it's like four witches.
Yeah, exactly.
See, you were hearing it the same way I was for almost all my life.
And we do a lot of that. Even, I'm going to say that even the songs in the prayer book that we sing in English, unless somebody actually reads them, they're not going to have any idea. I had an experience as a student rabbi where my son John where I don't remember why, but I always assumed that if you didn't understand the Hebrew, you'd read the translation and you'd want to know what you were saying. And at one point in the service, I turned to one of the members and I said, let's read the 150th Psalm that they used to say every day. It's the hallelujah of the hallelujahs. It's the psalm to end all psalms. It's the doxology, if you will. There's 5 books in Psalms, and the 5th one, the last one, the 150th Psalm, is the hallelujah to the hallelujahs of the 5 books. So it's called the Great Hallelujah, or the Grand Hallelujah. And in it, it talks about singing and dancing and drums and cymbals and violins and lyres, and not L-I-A-R, but L-Y-R-E, lyres, and all these big, beautiful instruments that they played all the time. And most Jews today, because the Orthodox don't play instruments on Shabbat, maybe that's a good place to end on, too. We'll tell a little bit about that story. But they used to. The Levites were the musicians. And so this one person in the congregation said, why does it talk about instruments? And I'm like, because they played them? And people don't realize that what they are experiencing is not the way it's been since antiquity. One of the melodies that Jews today, certainly in America, recognize very strongly is what we call the classical melody of the Shema. Shema Yisrael, and it goes on from there. That's from an opera. Right, in the 18th century, and people liked it, so they took it with them into the synagogue, and it was a popular melody back in those days, and now people think that they sang it that way in the temple. No, they didn't. Shema Yisrael, something probably closer to that, and even I'm not so foolish as to think that the melodies that we call trope, the melodies that we're taught to sing Torah to, I know they've changed because the Yemenite Jews have their melodies, the Moroccan Jews have their melodies, the Turkish Jews have their melodies, the Russian Jews have their melodies. I've learned over time that I sing Hungarian mod too, for the most part, which not surprisingly probably came from my father, who was Hungarian. So that was part of his identity. And so we've got all these different pieces. So musical instruments. Why don't Orthodox Jews play musical instruments? Well, as I mentioned before, the Levites were the ones who played it in the temple. It was a highly family-controlled job profession. The Kohanes were the priests. They did the butchering, not the slaughtering, but the butchering of the meat, the dressing of the meat. They did the roasting, they did the sacrifices, they did the ritual, they did the family counseling, they did the checking to see if your leprosy was healed. They did a lot of things. They were the wardens in the cities of refuge. They did a lot. They also took money from the Romans and sorted other things. It kind of got a little corrupt in there. And it was falling. It's one of the dangers when anything becomes too small and becomes too controlled, then the likelihood of corruption just increases exponentially. The Levites were the musicians. And when the temple was destroyed and rabbinic Judaism was the form of Judaism that won the hearts and souls of most Jews, not all, but most, they looked at the Levites and they said, it's such a tragedy that we don't have a temple anymore. When it's rebuilt, you'll play music again. But on Shabbat, we'll remember that the temple has been destroyed, and as part of our mourning for it, we won't have music. It was a way of getting them out of their job and out of their control. And so they gave the Kohen and the Levites ceremonial roles. Hey, you get called to Torah first. And once a year, we'll let you stand up, and you Levites can wash the Kohen's feet, and the Kohens can bless the congregation. It's a little token of what they used to have, quote, so that we remember who you are when we rebuild the temple. Whether they really wanted to, I don't know, actually. They were very glad to get that group out of power and change the structure of the community. And so we make these face-saving discussions. But that's how music got cut out. There's nothing inherently wrong with making a joyful noise unto God, right? we're supposed to be happy and joyful, and music helps us get there. And I've known a number of Orthodox Jews who do play instruments. Well, they won't repair them if a string breaks. They'll set it aside and let it be. Yeah, so some people do that anyway, right, until they get time to, or get around to getting the string. And it's not when you should be tuning the piano. Right? The tuning of the piano should have happened before. And if a key breaks, you don't fix it. If you get a flat on the tire, don't fix it. Call AAA. But right, and that's another piece of modern life. If we live together as a functional, vibrant community with many different views along that 6-9, all recognizing that entity that we're trying to connect to feel connection to, is the same thing. It's the same creator source of life. Then we can be more tolerant and we can support each other so that I can help you do your day of worship and you can help me. And we can cover for each other. It's how I ended up in the hospitals being the chaplain on Sundays, leading chapel service, because my Christian colleagues were all busy in their churches. And so I felt, hey, this is a time I can really go and free them. I can put my feet and my action to what I'm saying we should do. And so I did. I made a point of signing up for Sundays so that Christian clergy didn't have to. Mm-hmm. And the only time it was a real problem was if it was a Jewish holiday, and then they all looked at me and said, how come you're not here? It's like, well, holiday kind of trumps Sunday. And we're going to have that actually this month. We're going to have Shabbat trumping a holiday, which is Tisha B'Av, which is a day of fasting. And it is postponed until Saturday night because you don't fast except for Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the only fast strong enough to hold itself at simultaneously with Shabbat. And there's this little bit of duel between Shabbat. Shabbat actually still wins, but because Yom Kippur is not a sad fast. It's a fast where you're spending so much of your time in prayer that you're not thinking about eating. And so we're getting that notice that we're down to 1 minute to go. Mm-hmm. And we have to wrap it up. And so I'm going to invite people to either let me know what topic they'd like. Maybe they can call in next time on 340-1590. You're certainly welcome to join us at Congregation Eitz Chayim, 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102. Friday night services at 7:30. You can catch us streaming on Facebook as well. And Saturday morning, we do Stolen Moments at 9:30 and services at 10:30. And so if somebody could give me a couple of second warning here.
Well, you keep talking.
Keep talking. Okay. Not a problem.
No, now, this show, you were live on Facebook.
Yeah.
And, of course, we're on YouTube as well. And back next Friday following Ask a Lawyer with Stuart Edrus.
Right. So we're going to ask a lawyer, then ask a rabbi.
And see how they disagree.
There you go. At 11:05.
This is WPSL, Port St. Lucie.